So you can see on my palette here what my final colors ended up being after mixing all of this. These are most of the colors that I see on the canvas, and I'm just going to start putting them where they're supposed to go. Okay, so we're just going to start laying these colors down and get a good head start on the painting. The darkest colors are going to be right along this line over here. And also, if you have this color, if you apply it sort of semi-transparently, which we are, the color that you see underneath it is going to be similar in value. This is a fairly small painting, so we're going to cover a lot of balloon area pretty quickly. There's actually quite a few little subtle reflections in here that I didn't pick up until I got my nose right in there. I'm probably going to add those back in the end, perhaps, with some, like I said, painting wet into wet. I think I'll probably do that at the end. I'm just going to get the basic balloon colors in here first. You won't see me paint wet into wet a whole lot except for when I'm blending, and that's essentially what I'm doing here. I'm just making this colors change more gradual. And then I will be adding another layer to this, of course. So I like to say that it's a good opportunity to use this layer to practice. You know, hey, why take such care to do this right if you're just going to paint over it? Okay, well, one of those reasons would be you can use this to practice. That gives you twice as many paintings. I don't do many paintings during the year because it takes me so long to complete a painting, so I don't get a lot of time to just practice. And, you know, like everybody else, I need practice, and I also like to try new techniques. So one good way for me to practice is to pay extra attention to this layer, even though I don't really need to. Now I'm going to do something here. I'm going to take, instead of painting dark to light, I'm going to take my lightest color. I do this pretty regularly. I'm going to take this color and I'm just going to put it over here and get it established. Because as I work from left to right over here, or from dark to light, I'm sorry, it happens to be left to right in this particular painting, but I want to have an idea of where I'm going or where I'm going to end up. So you don't have to do this step, but this is a good way to test yourself to make sure that, hey, did I mix my colors correctly? If so, if I gradually lighten these colors as I'm painting on my palette, I should end up precisely on this color. So it can help you gauge your blending. It can help you gauge how gradual your blending is if you're doing that correctly. It can help you in several different ways, mainly that way. I want to establish where my lightest colors are. There's another thing too that most of the time, I would say, when a painting is wrong, it's because the colors that you're mixing are too light. We have a tendency to not see colors as dark as they should be. That's especially true with portraiture. Whenever you're painting a portrait and you think, there's no way that color can be right, it's way too dark. And then by the time you get to the end, once you have some of the other darker colors painted in, you realize, oh wow, that color was right all along. And you might not think that these colors are right that I'm mixing on here. I don't know, maybe you do. But this is the reason that I don't guess. We mixed these and checked each of them before we moved forward with the painting. So I know that they're correct. So I need to trust that, and I do trust that. But even though I trust it, I'm still going to come in here and give myself a reference, because it does help me, not second guess myself. Even though I trust myself, I do still second guess myself just like everybody else. And it's going to give me a goal, and it'll help my brain say, okay, well, this is where we're headed. How do we get there? It'll help us when we're mixing our colors. So all I'm doing right here is just adding the color that I know is the lightest of the colors that I have. This is the lightest one, not including highlights and whatever. I try to use pressure here to flatten my brush while using the edge of my brush to make a straight line. So instead of using the point of the brush to pick along the edge, I'm laying the brush down and using pressure to flatten the brush to the width that I want. Once I see where that line is, once I establish the edge of my brush, I'm then just going to sort of drag that brush along the line to get a straightish line. On a small painting like this, it's a little bit more difficult. And you can always use a smaller brush. In fact, if you want it to be more accurate, you should just keep using smaller and smaller and smaller brushes, I would say. I sort of try to set myself a limit when I'm painting. For example, I'm going to say, all right, well, I'm only going to use a brush up to a 3-0. Beyond that, I'm just going to say, all right, that's it for this painting. But if you want to make the painting as good as you can possibly get it, using a smaller brush, that helps. There's a lot of little areas in here that I could fix, and I probably will fix on my final layer. But for now, we're just sort of laying these colors in here, and so I don't need or want to fix those. So those are my lightest colors. Now I'm just going to go down one more. Instead of going back to where I was, I'm going to work from light to dark for a bit here. And I didn't clean my brush because I'm using similar colors. And I'm gonna, because I didn't clean my brush, I'm gonna start over here on the right-hand side, which is going to be lighter. You can use a different brush, you can clean your brush, you can do whatever you'd like. I keep track of what I'm doing this way so that I'm not constantly cleaning brushes and I'm not constantly switching brushes. I personally don't like to switch brushes. Some people do, that's okay. Do it that way if that's what you like. At the end of the day, I recommend taking little bits and pieces from as many artists as you think necessary. It's unlikely that you're going to find one artist who has every technique exactly the same way that you want to paint. If you're a beginner, then you probably don't know how you want to paint. And the way you want to paint is probably going to evolve as you learn. I learned from a few different artists, from watching YouTube videos and from watching DVDs that I bought, from reading books and going to museums and looking at those paintings in person. You can learn a lot about techniques by looking at art in real life, and especially after you've had some experience. It may not help you a whole lot at first, perhaps, but if you learn the Flemish technique and then walk through and look at some old Dutch paintings, or just any classical, paintings, you'll start to see those techniques. You'll start to recognize those. So we're going to keep working on this, and that's not to say that contemporary ideas are wrong or worse. That's just they're contemporary. So a lot of people don't use this Flemish technique that I basically am using here. I don't always use it either, like I said, but I do like it in this particular instance. I think it works really well. Covering the balloon, and would I want to do this on a large painting? I mean, I have done it. It does take a lot of extra time, and it does look good. So, I mean, it does something special to your painting. I wouldn't rule it out just because it takes longer. I don't live my life. Now again, I'm going to this same color that I use over here. It's a darker color, but because I didn't clean my brush, it's going to be slightly lighter than it was when I was painting with it just a few minutes ago. That's on purpose, and because of that, I'm going to start on my other edge over here, my lighter edge at first, and then eventually it won't matter anymore, but it's because I do have a lighter pigment in my brush. Now, I'm sure there's no shortage of people who are going to say that's poor practice, but you know, I don't agree, so I'm going to do it this way. I don't want to have 15 brushes to clean at the end of the day, unless doing so is making my work better. I'm not going to shy away from work ever. However, I'm not going to do work just for the sake of doing work, because that's silly. So if putting forth extra work is making my painting better, then I'm absolutely going to do that. If it's just making extra work, then what am I doing, you know? I got other things to be doing here. So now I'm going to blur these edges together a little bit. I'm painting them together. I'm not blending them together. I am painting them together, wet on wet, with very similar colors. These colors have already been verified for value, tone, you know, color, temperature. These are the right colors. So the further apart the colors are that you're mixing together, the more likely you are to be ruining whatever colors you've mixed. The closer the colors are to being together as far as value, the more likely they are to be. Anytime you mix two colors, if you mix colors the way I mix colors and the way we've talked about that earlier today, you know that just adding one color to the other doesn't always mean that color, the resulting color, is going to be correct. If you just add black to white, you're going to get a gray, but is that gray supposed to be gray? Is it supposed to be blue gray, or is it supposed to be green gray? Is it supposed to be warm, cool? Who knows? And that gray color that you get is going to depend on what white and what black you used. So my point is that if you're just blending a lighter color into a darker color, or vice versa, that middle color isn't necessarily going to be correct. It's going to be probably correct in value because you've mixed, you know, a white and a black. It's probably going to be the right value, but is it going to be the right color? Maybe, maybe not. And is your painting going to look okay? It might still look fine, but it's not going to be accurate. And the more of those little mistakes that you make, they add up, you know? And so anytime that you can use your knowledge or practice or ability to get rid of some of those errors, your painting is just going to look that much better. Each one of those inconsistencies that you can remove from your work, the better your work will be. Okay, so we're just continuing to add this down here. Essentially, we're just painting over the balloon that we've already painted, using seemingly the same colors. So this layer is basically being solidified by the layer that was under it. And it's going to look better because of that. Otherwise, anywhere where I don't have proper paint coverage, your burnt umber layer would be showing through, or your gessoed canvas would be showing through. Anytime you have paint transparency, what shows through underneath it has an effect on the painting. So Sometimes that's good, sometimes it's bad. We're using that to our advantage intentionally here. We have the right values mixed underneath our painting. This edge here that I'm painting near is actually a pretty sharp edge. So we want to be careful not to do too much blending here. We want to make it just barely blurry and keep the ridge off of it, the paint ridge. This is where you have to be careful when you're using this medium, because this medium is designed to keep brush strokes, and we don't really want brush strokes, and so we do have to be extra careful in that regard. Now I'm going to take this, I'm going to double check this color here that I have mixed real quick, just to make sure I'm using the right color. It's been minutes since I mixed these, okay, so I'm good there. I just want to make sure. Sometimes I might forget which colors I'm using where. It happens. It happens. So not a big deal. We'll just check them. We're a little bit lighter here. I'm going to leave a little bit, the edge of this balloon, the outside edge of this balloon has a little bit of reflected light in it, and so we're going to use this color that we mixed earlier for that. It's also a little bit hard to tell in the photo, and it's a little bit hard to tell that I have the exact color. So we're going to mix that at the end, analyze it and see how it looks, and then if we have to fix it, we'll fix it in our next layer in a few days. One of the many benefits of painting in layers, if you do make a mistake, you can more easily fix it. That's not to say that you can't fix it if you don't paint in layers, because you can. You can fix it with the alla prima technique just the same. But it is a little bit more dangerous, I would say, because you're going to get more opportunity if you're correcting. You're going to be painting wet into wet, which can lead to muddy colors if you don't have a good sense of how you're mixing your colors. So, I'm not going to stand here and say that you can't fix it just because you're painting alla prima. That would be inaccurate, and so I'm not going to say that. But I would say that it is easier. That is a benefit of painting in many layers, because you can make mistakes. I don't think that should be your only reason or your main reason. You should try to learn to not make mistakes, right? But it's just one of the benefits. Now we go a little bit lighter down here. I think at the very bottom it gets a little bit darker, but only at the very end. I feel like our underpainting is a little bit maybe wrong in that regard. We've got it darker down there. I see it only darker maybe at the very tip down here. So we're going to go with that. That's what I see now versus what I saw yesterday when I was painting this, or actually it was a couple days ago. But now that reflected light is less over here in the shadow because it's in the shadow. So, but it is still there somewhat. I'm going to go over here towards the edge. Okay, I want to add that in here now so that I don't forget. We're going to mix a little bit of that in here. We're going to start at the top where I know it's more prominent. I'm going to put it along the edge here. Now, the background is not painted currently. And we really need these ultimately to blend together. So there's more than one way to do that. We can use glazing to fix that, and we can also make sure that on our final layer, we're also painting the background at the same time. Both of those techniques are, both of those techniques work, and that's how I sort of manage this, because you can't always have I try to actually plan it so that I do always have wet edges to work with, but you just simply can't. I didn't want to commit to painting this area here is actually, very difficult, and I didn't want to commit to mixing up those paints today, especially while I'm filming. It's also a Saturday, and I didn't want to commit to a full day today, and I didn't want to mix up paints and then not have time to paint them. So we're going to go back to this mixture. Now, I didn't clean my brush intentionally. I'm going to this darker color because this reflected light sort of goes away. But it's also a little bit different than the color that we pre-mixed. So again, it's one of the rare times when I do mix on the palette or on the canvas. And, I'm going to point this out again. I'm not saying that mixing on the canvas or on the palette is incorrect. It's just that that's not my style of painting, doesn't usually rely on that. I usually don't do that. I like to pre-mix my colors for the most part. I always do some on the canvas or on the palette mixing in real time. But as a rule, I tend to not do that. Like I just did right there. I'm going to mix a little bit right here because this color changes at the bottom down here. It gets slightly darker, just barely. I should probably be using my smaller brush here, but I think we're going to make that work. Okay, so we're getting this going. Now we have some other colors here we're about to get ready to mix in. This color that we mixed separately over here, or that I mixed off camera, it's basically these colors, but it's reflected, and then I added a bunch of yellow and red and also burnt umber. It's reflecting into the shadows down here, which are probably it's probably the hardest part in painting, I would say, is reflected light. And especially in low lit areas, you're going to think that the colors are way lighter than they are. Now I have double checked these colors to make sure that they're okay. And the first time you start painting reflected light, and you're almost certainly going to be off. It's almost certainly going to be too light. It's really hard to get it through your head that those colors are dark. It's very frustrating, and you will probably second guess yourself. I certainly still see them incorrectly, sometimes. I can anticipate that I'm seeing them incorrectly, and so I just take the time to double check them. But it is one of those things that it is definitely difficult. Now, right here, I know that this color that I mixed isn't going to actually be perfect for all of this, so I use the same color on all of that, even though I know that it's actually not correct. But that's just because I am going to be painting another layer, and I'm going to be the most detailed in the final layer. And so I can allow myself a little leeway here in this layer. I often do that. I allow myself to say, okay, this isn't perfect, but it is close. It's going to get me much closer. So, for example, let's say I'm working in this layer and I'm thinking about 40 things. Well, in my next layer, a lot of those things have been figured out. So maybe I'm only thinking about 10 things or 20 things, or 3 things. So each pass, I have 1 or 2 or 3 or 12 or whatever the number is, more questions answered. So I'm thinking about fewer and fewer things, and that allows me to focus more and more on details and worry a little bit less, perhaps, on other issues. Now what I'm doing here is taking this color that I know is on the back side of that balloon, and I'm mixing it with this reflected light. Because this color gets darker right here, but it's still lighter than the actual background. And I know that this color harmony is going to work most likely. I am checking it, by the way, on the brush. I'm just holding the brush up to my picture. But I'm already confident that they're going to work because I've already spent a lot of time mixing those colors. It's the same light affecting both of these colors. So it's not like it's a different part of the painting. So whenever you have that situation, it's the same color and the same light. It's usually safe to mix those 2 colors together rather than starting from scratch and trying to mix the color accurately again. You can certainly do that, but I try to cut my workload down as much as possible when it's appropriate. And that's one of those times when it works perfectly well to do it that way. So now I'm just going to go ahead and basically fill in this color that I already had pre-mixed. We've got kind of a little funny edge there. That's one of those spots where we have that little highlight. We're going to add, I'll just add that in at the end unless I forget. I do like to add highlights even though you're going to paint over them because it's just almost just like a placeholder. So I'm going to take a little bit of this reflected light and I'm going to put it in with this color because I know that's where I was in my mixture, and I'm going to put it right here. This is a situation here where I'm somewhat guessing. It's a little bit hard to see in the photograph. So I'm taking a combination of this reflected light that I know is also being reflected right here, looking at my reference photo, and then I'm taking some of this shade. I'm sort of blending them together until I have about the right value. That's the goal for right there. So I am mixing them on my palette. I know that when I mix that, it's going to be approximately correct. It needs to be darker than this area over here and lighter than this area over here. So a little bit off there, so I'm going to darken it a little bit. And so that's what mixing it on the canvas is like, or mixing it on the palette real time and then taking it to the canvas. So I do that, and I have painted entire paintings that way as well. And you can do that. That's basically a la prima painting. Lots of beautiful paintings are done that way. I would say that this way that I am showing you here is actually probably better for beginners especially. And it's not that it's a beginner technique, because I'm not a beginner and I still use it. I prefer it. But there's plenty of my peers who mix their colors as they go on canvas, and they're creating beautiful work. So there's no right way to do it. I think it's about what way works best for you, or maybe which way you prefer to work, you know? Maybe they both work equally well for you, but you prefer one way or the other. So I've got a little bit of variation here on my photo. So I'm just going to put some more reflected light in here, and I'm going to blend this in. Now this is more of a traditional sort of way to lighten something. It can certainly lead to inaccurate colors if you're not careful, if you don't know what you're doing. even when you do know what you're doing. But I'm confident in this color being correct. I'm going to add that in there. It's a little tiny, subtle area. Okay? We're just going to keep working on it. And again, I could just completely forget about that and let's just say we'll get it next time. There's no shame in doing that either. And I also know that quote-unquote highlight up here is this reflected light color. So I'm going to add this little detail, add those in there right now while I have this color on my brush and before it gets too dry. It's okay. So I'm going to put those on there and I'm going to blend it in just a tad. I'm trying to mess up the edges a little bit. Right here, I really need a smaller brush. I'm not going to get a smaller brush. I'm going to make do with what I have. If you want this to look, as absolutely best that you possibly could get it to look, then you need to use a smaller brush. I'm trying to blend the edges of this, just take them down slightly. I also know that I'm going to be painting over this, so whatever I do here can be fixed later. This isn't something that, like, what I'm doing here really isn't the difference between a good painting and a bad painting. It's, just going to be the difference between you making it as real as you can versus not. The painting is going to look just fine if you don't get that exactly perfect right there. I want this to be a little bit lighter here, so I'm going to lighten it just a tad. And I want it to be a little bit blurrier. Okay, I am going to finish this up by getting the ridges off, the paint ridges off, and then I'm going to make sure that I don't have any weak spots here. I just had a brush hair there. Weak spots meaning spots where you can see through the paint to the underpainting more noticeably than before. I want to have a pretty solid paint film, if that makes any sense. So I'm not dragging paint around here, I'm just dabbing it lightly. I want to take down any ridges, and there is going to be a slight blending of the paint, but very, very minimal. I do not like to use blending brushes to blend. Okay, that's very important in my painting style. I do not use, for the most part, blending brushes for blending. Okay, we're going to continue moving on up to the top here. We've got some more reflected light to paint at the top. For me, this is a very good example of a very good spot to show how this color doesn't really look right on the palette. But it definitely is right. It's just hard to explain, really. It's also a little bit hard to explain because this is a video that you're watching. In person, it's a little clearer about what I'm talking about. If you're just looking at the palette and you're thinking, oh, there's no way that color is going to work, that would certainly be understandable. But it does work. That is the right color. So this line here that I've painted is actually should be a little bit more blurry. So I'm going to take this brush here, the smaller brush. We're going to work on that a little bit here. I'm going to make this a little bit more blurry. I'm doing that, I'm just drawing little shapes. I like to draw little X's or just lines perpendicular to the line that I'm trying to make blurry. We have these colors mixed up along the edge that are much different. And again, they might look completely wrong too. They are completely different, but they are correct. Like I said, I have checked them. Just checked them again, even, Now I've basically mixed up 3 colors for this when there's probably more like 10, right? Okay, but that's all right. We're just paraphrasing, so to speak, on these colors. Now I added a little bit of brown there because I wanted that to be a little bit darker. And I know that, because I checked it earlier in the painting, I know that brown works with this color to make it darker. Otherwise, I would have, verified that first. I did verify it, I just did it a while ago. That's the point that I was trying to make. Also, this color is reflected up here as well, which is why I left that little spot right there. There's a little weird reflection right there. And then there is more dark paint right here. So we're going to put that in there. What I just did right there is not going to be entirely accurate. But there are times in a painting when I just simply say, it simply isn't going to matter. I do have color harmony because I'm using pre-mixed colors. There's going to be times when I just say, okay, enough is enough. I'm just going to wing it. Those times are going to be very, very rare. And then even some of those times, I'm still going to be right anyway with the colors, because I do have experience and practice. So those times are not going to be all wrong. So anyway, I don't want to come out here saying that I don't ever guess, but I do want to say that it's very rare that I guess. So we're moving forward now. We got a very subtle shift in value and tone here. This is getting more orange as we get to the top up here. Likely because it's more directly in the light, I would imagine. We have a little bit of that more orangey color making its way all the way down to the bottom down here. When I start talking about reflected light and this detail and that detail, I try not to use what I quote unquote know too much. What I'm doing is painting what I see, and if I don't understand what I'm seeing, I'm going to analyze that. I'm going to mix a color, for example, and I'm going to check that color. Because what's going to happen is you're going to tell yourself that you know what you see, and you're going to be wrong a lot of the times. And unfortunately, you're probably not going to know that you're wrong unless you've ever made a habit out of checking. I thought I was right all the time, or that's not true, but I thought I was right more of the time, more than not. And I found out as I was learning to mix colors this way that was probably not ever true. I was probably wrong most of the time. It's discouraging, but it's also reality. And if you want to paint realism, photorealism, you need to paint reality, right? You don't have to have, if you're trying to paint a representational paintings that look great, you don't have to have perfect colors and perfect shapes. But if you're trying to paint photorealism, you do. You need to be able to match the colors precisely. Otherwise, you're not getting reality. If you want to change the photos and if you want to do all of that stuff, that's perfectly fine. That looks great. You don't have to paint exactly what the photo shows. But it's semantics. I would argue that's not photorealism. It's not wrong. It's just not photorealism. It can still look like a photo with the filter. I guess what I mean is it's not my photo. The photo that I have, if I want it to look that way on purpose, then I can do that. If I don't want it to look like that, I can do that too, and that's not wrong. That's just depends on what your goal is. What are you trying to accomplish? Do you know? You know what I'm saying? Either way of those, do you want to change the photo? Go for it. Change the photo. Go for it, by all means. But by changing the photo, are you making it more real? I mean, you might be making it better, but you're not necessarily making it more real. You're making it the way you want to make it. But my point is that that choice should be intentional. If you want to make changes to the photo, it shouldn't be because you don't know how to match the photo. Okay, that's the distinction that I'm trying to make. If you're incapable of doing it, that's fine, practice. If you don't want to do it, that's also fine. If you want to use the photo as a guide. Believe it or not, that's what I do. I do change I don't exactly copy my photo reference, although sometimes I do, and then when I don't, it's on purpose. That's the most important part. You should not be crossing your fingers and hoping for the best when you start to paint. You need to learn how to manipulate the paint to do what you want it to do, right? And it can be difficult, obviously. It's not easy. But leaving it to chance is not a great recipe for success. You don't just put your crock pot on and start dumping a bunch of stuff in there. That's going to end in disaster. Probably more than not, you know, and painting is no different. If you want to make the right color, mix the right color. Learn to mix the right color. Don't just reach into your palette, grab a whole bunch of different reds and hope for the best. You know, don't do that. Yeah, some of those will probably look great, but a lot of them won't. And then even when they do look great, you'll know that it was luck. You don't want to paint by luck. Now, that's not to say that you can't get lucky sometimes. That's fine. I make some paintings look better with luck, and that's great when that happens. But that shouldn't be your strategy. I feel like that's a losing strategy. Now, again, we're not really going to ever have this outside line the way we want it because we don't have a wet background edge. We really need to blend those together in order to have that the way we ultimately really want it. But it's okay for now. We're just going to leave it like this. There's actually a little bit of a darkening area over here too, which is frustrating. It's really hard to see. I'm not sure if it's a reflection or something that I didn't notice before. This might be one of those times actually where I don't match the photo because I don't like it. I feel like it's confusing. Which brings me to a good point. I think sometimes reality, like what exists in the photo, even though it's correct, might seem weird. It might seem like a mistake. And you don't really want people looking at your painting, or I don't, and thinking, oh, he messed up. You know? So like sometimes I will decide, okay, I'm going to change that because it does look like a mistake, even though I know that it isn't a mistake. That could be my own vanity, but I think it makes the painting better if somebody looks at it and doesn't say, oh, that's obviously a mistake. You know, and maybe it's only obvious to me, who knows? I don't always know what I'm doing, right? I'm not ashamed to say that. But sometimes if I see something on my painting and I think, oh, you know what? When I see that, it looks like a mistake to me, even though I know that I've matched it perfectly and it looks just like my photo reference. It looks like a mistake, and I don't want somebody else to look at that and think, oh, that's a mistake. And then I have to sit there and explain, well, actually, it's not, because that sounds ridiculous. Anyway, I don't want to dwell on that because it's kind of silly, but right, what I'm doing here is I'm just taking some time to do a little bit of blending here. I want this edge to be a little blurry. It is a sharp edge, but I'm still, it needs to be somewhat blurry. So I'm just doing a little bit of that work now so that when I get ready in the end to do a little bit of overall blending, I don't want to have too much to do. So I'm just taking some time to do that right now. End of this little section. We've got our brightest area up here. Still, we're going to get here. Now I'm purposely not painting into the red there. I always leave a gap, it's a small gap, but I'm purposely not painting into the other color because I'm going to go back and do that separately. I'm just trying to get this edge as best I can. Ultimately, I'll probably define that edge from the outside in using my background color, or just a combination of both. On a painting that's this scale, it's extra difficult, unless you're using, when you're using my rule of sort of like, I'm saying, all right, I'm only going to use a 3-0. I'm not going to use the smallest brush that I possibly can. And I'm not even using a 3-0. That was a 0. Now I have a 3-0. I'm going to use the 3-0 now with this other color, and I'm going to mix these two together somewhat here because I know that we're having a shift up here at the top. I know that these colors shift together right here because I've verified this beforehand. I'm just trying to get this color gradually blended, and this is another example of mixing on the canvas, okay? I'm just letting this mix together as it goes, but it's because I've already checked these colors together. I know that when I mix one with the other, I get the proper transition color. It's very important that if that doesn't make sense to you yet when I say that, it should make sense. Mixing two colors together doesn't always mean that that third color is going to be correct. You need to check that, and especially at first. It's, if you mix black and white, you're going to get a gray, but what kind of gray, Is it the right kind of gray? Because there's a million different grays, right? My point is that you don't really know what that third color is going to be, and if you just mix two colors together that you're using in your painting, most of the time it's going to be fine, but not always. And again, you don't really want to be guessing about that stuff. You don't want to just throw your ingredients into the crock pot and hope for the best. Or I don't. That would be gross. Eventually. You're going to get something gross eventually. On a small painting, especially when you have a shape like this, a geometric shape, a balloon with a hard edge, it's more critical to get that right. Okay, I'm going to have to fix this. So I'm leaving a little gap here. If you've taken a one-on-one lesson with me, you'll notice that I do this. I won't just go right up and start painting into my darker or lighter color. I'll leave a small little gap. And then when I get ready to blend those together, I'll edit my paint brush accordingly, depending on what I'm trying to accomplish, so that I have paint on my brush, but then I wipe it mostly off like I just did right there. Okay? And then I will paint sort of on the edge, and then that's when I'll start to blend. So I won't just drag the paint that I've already put down into that darker, older paint as my blending process. I'll always use fresh paint. And I might even use a specific color, because like if you're doing, for example, if you're blending together a yellow and a black, you're going to have a green area right there, and maybe it's not supposed to be green. So maybe you need to mix up the right color so that that transition looks correct. If you just blend one color into the next, you're letting fate decide if the color that you're getting when you mix those two, and I've said this a couple times already, is correct. That's usually an issue on the background, perhaps, or like it's an issue between different objects. Typically, if you're blending, like I'm doing here, paint that you've already mixed on the same object, it's probably going to be fine. And in this case, it is fine. But like for the outside here, the the background, it won't necessarily be, because the background is sort of blue. So it might actually change that interim color quite a bit. Now I've got a little bit of an edge here that I don't want to see, so I'm going to do a little bit of blending. And as I've mentioned, when I say blending, I'm not really blending, I'm painting. I do have paint on my brush, and I'm painting wet on wet into my other color to gradually move those together. I don't drag paint from one side to the next. I paint from one side into the next. It's a small, subtle difference, but it'll start to make sense. And if you see the two results, it'll make even more sense, hopefully.